Welcome to the International News Channel, News LD. Today we present to you a news entitled,
Canada says all options on table over claims China tried to interfere in election, harass lawmaker. Canada and China have changed into embroiled in a recent diplomatic row after Ottawa summoned Beijing's ambassador to reply to allegations that Beijing tried to intimidate a Canadian politician and interfere in its elections. Canadian Overseas Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly introduced the summoning of the ambassador Thursday, including that Canada was contemplating taking retaliatory motion over the allegations, which China vigorously denies. All options are on the desk, Joly mentioned, together with diplomatic expulsions. Joly's feedback to members of parliament got here throughout a heated change with opposition lawmaker Michael Chong, the alleged goal of the intimidation, who has in current days closely criticized Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's authorities for what he sees as their sluggish response to the allegations. The information follows revelations, first reported by the Globe and Mail newspaper, that the Canadian Safety Intelligence Service, CSIS, discovered an accredited Chinese-language diplomat in the nation had focused Chong and his relations in China following his criticisms of Beijing's therapy of its Uyghur minorities. The intelligence service additionally mentioned that Beijing had tried to sway the result of Canada's federal elections in 2019 and 2021. China on Thursday insisted the claims had been completely groundless, accused the Canadian media and politicians of spreading disinformation, and warned Canada towards going additional down the flawed and harmful path. Throughout the summons, China's ambassador to Canada, Kang Peiwood, protested strongly towards the risk to expel the related Chinese-language diplomatic and consular personnel based mostly on rumors of so-called China interference overvalued by some Canadian politicians and media, in accordance to an announcement from the Chinese-language embassy. China's diplomatic and consular officers' regular efficiency, each day actions, should not be smeared, and China's sovereignty, safety, and improvement pursuits should not be violated, Kang mentioned. He advised Canadian officers on the assembly to instantly cease this self-directed political farce and warned that China would play alongside each step of the way in which till the top up to the Canadian aspect proceed to make provocations. China's consulate basic in Toronto in the meantime expressed robust dissatisfaction and agency opposition to the summoning of the ambassador, and insisted its officers had by no means engaged in actions inconsistent with their official capacities. The declare has no factual foundation and is completely groundless, the consulate basic mentioned in an announcement. It accused some Canadian media and politicians of spreading disinformation with intent to injure the fame and picture of the Chinese-language consulate basic and maliciously disrupt regular exchange and cooperation between the two sides. Allegations of Chinese-language efforts to interfere in Canadian politics have been swirling for weeks, however reached a tipping level this week following the revelations by the Globe and Mail. In accordance to the report, Chinese-language operatives tried to swing some native parliamentary races throughout nationwide elections held in 2019 and 2021. Nonetheless, the company stopped warning, alleging that China succeeded or in any method modified the result of these elections. The allegations additionally embrace claims that an accredited Chinese-language diplomat was concerned in a plot to intimidate Chong in 2021 after he sponsored a movement in Canada's parliament to condemn China's therapy of Uyghur minorities, labeling their therapy by China genocide. Chong has described his obvious concentrating on as disturbing, however has additionally mentioned it not shocking, both for him or Canada's giant Chinese-language diaspora, and has centered a lot of his criticism on the Canadian authorities' response, which he says has been too sluggish to act. In her feedback to parliamentarians on Thursday, Joly mentioned Canada's authorities wanted to fastidiously weigh how China would possibly react. China would in fact take motion towards Canada's financial curiosity, shopper curiosity and in addition diplomatic pursuits, Joly mentioned, including that, I do know that we are beneath strain to go quick, however, we want to be sure as properly that we defend our democracy. Relations between Ottawa and Beijing have been tense in current years. In a single particularly high-profile instance, two Canadians, former diplomat Michael Kovac and businessman Michael Spiver, had been detained by China for almost 3 years. Their arrest on espionage hosts in late 2018 got here shortly after Canada arrested Chinese-language businesswoman and Huawei government Meng Wanzhou on a U.S. warrant associated to the corporate's enterprise dealings in Iran, Beijing repeatedly denied that their circumstances had been a political retaliation. However, the two mails had been launched on the identical day Meng was allowed by Canada to return to China. Chong responded to Joly's remarks by demanding Canada expel the diplomat no matter any potential blowback from China. If we don't take that plan of action, Minister, we are mainly placing up an enormous billboard for all of the authoritarian states all over the world that says we're open for overseas interference risk actions on Canadian soil concentrating on Canadian residents, and you'll conduct these actions with zero penalties, and that's why this particular person wants to be dispatched packing, Chong mentioned. Chong and others say questions stay as to why the Trudeau authorities didn't act sooner to acknowledge and act on the intelligence. It's astounding that the federal government hasn't taken motion to expel this particular person, Chong advised a press briefing in Ottawa Tuesday. And for the federal government of Canada to proceed to accredit this particular person and permit this particular person to stay in Canada is an entire abdication of accountability, he added. Critics have additionally questioned why Chong and different politicians weren't forewarned of the intelligence, suggesting he had been focused. Whereas Trudeau was briefed on a number of the intelligence company's findings, he mentioned Tuesday at a press briefing that he had not been briefed particularly on the alleged concentrating on of Chong. Trudeau mentioned he first heard this when it was reported in the media, because the spy company had felt the intelligence was not important sufficient to notify both the Prime Minister's workplace or Chong himself. Trudeau mentioned that reasoning was a mistake. We're making it very, very clear to CSIS and our intelligence officers that when there are issues that discuss particularly about any MP, or about their household, these want to be elevated, even when CSIS doesn't really feel that it's an ample stage of concern for them to take extra direct motion, Trudeau mentioned. Chong, a member of the opposition Conservative Get-Together, has criticized Trudeau's rationalization as unacceptable, saying he and others in the Chinese language group deserve to know if they're in danger. I've not spoken to my household in China in years. I, like many Canadians throughout the nation whose household lives in authoritarian states, have had to face the troublesome dilemma of how to defend the household and these authoritarian states, Chong mentioned, including that the Chinese language diplomat who allegedly focused him nonetheless lives and works in Canada and enjoys diplomatic immunity. Chong and different opposition Get-Together politicians usually are not the ones demanding a tricky response from Ottawa. Among the many voices calling for retaliation is Dennis Molinaro, a former nationwide safety advisor and now a professor of authorized research at Ontario Tech College. Canada actually has to be following the American mannequin in phrases of extra aggressively pursuing motion towards China when China is engaged in these actions which might be direct threats to Canadian sovereignty, he advised News LD in a phone interview Wednesday. I feel the Canadian public is conscious of that now and acknowledges that, and helps lots harder motion in phrases of Canada defending itself from these sorts of threats, he added.